This is Clean Sweep, released in 1982 for the almighty VECTREX Arcade System, and if this game looks remotely familiar, then I'm sure it's entirely and purely coincidental. No way in hell would Clean Sweep dare plagiarize the almighty Puck-Man. Even though you have a maze with dots scattered throughout and you have to collect all the dots from the maze to clear the round while avoiding all the bad guys who look like giant claw things and not ghosts, so you see, Clean Sweep is totally different from the other guy. I mean, it has to be after what happened to poor Casey Munchkin and all the legal battles throughout. So what makes Clean Sweep different from Pac-Man? Well, for one thing, you're controlling a vacuum cleaner. Those little dots on screen, that's actually money stolen from the bank that the bank robbers left behind. Those claw critters chasing you, those are the aforementioned bank robbers. And because you're a vacuum cleaner, you have a finite amount of space to gather up dots of money. The more dots of money you collect, the bigger your sack gets, until you reach a point where your sack is full and you can no longer collect dots, which means you'll have to deposit that money over to the bank, which sits in the middle of the playfield. Instead of fat dots that give you a fighting chance, you have 4 special rooms in the corner of the maze that you could get in for a boost to fight off those robbers for a short period of time. And as an added bonus, while you're in this powered state, you can chomp down a few more dots to add to your full sack. See? Totally different from Pac-Man. Right, so in all seriousness, Clean Sweep is pretty straightforward maze fare. You move your vacuum cleaner around with a stick, and it works well enough, though it's not always the slickest reacting controls, but it's not all bad. Gameplay generally starts off slow and eventually picks up speed after a few levels, until a certain point where you'll hit level infinity and the game just stops getting harder. The game provides you with 2 modes of play aside from the usual 1 or 2 player alternating play. There's a standard mode and also a lights out mode where the maze turns invisible and you'll have to navigate your way in the dark. Not bad for those wanting a serious challenge, which Clean Sweep often struggles with, especially early on. For your typical maze fare, Clean Sweep is more than competent and actually quite fun once the pace starts to pick up. The idea of having a limited number of dots to eat before needing to deposit them in the bank to empty your sack makes gameplay a bit more interesting, though ultimately, despite claims to the contrary, Clean Sweep is the usual Pac-Man-esque maze game with a couple unique bits that makes it somewhat different from the rest. Graphically speaking, it's fairly simplistic fare. Your vacuum cleaner looks like a vacuum cleaner, as much as it could on the VECTREX, and the bag does get bigger as it fills up. The claw-looking things that are supposed to be robbers are an interesting choice to depict robbers. The maze and dots look the part, nothing fancy there. Sound effects aren't anything to write home about. In fact, a couple of the jingles seem to have been nicked from other VECTREX games, most notably Star Trek. So yeah, that's a bit disappointing, but to be expected somewhat, and not entirely exclusive to the VECTREX. A lot of consoles tend to recycle sound effects and such. That's just the way it is. Overall, Clean Sweep is a perfectly functional and rather enjoyable little maze game thing on the VECTREX that does a couple things differently enough to keep it from being a full-blown Pac clone. Mind you, among the many other similar games on the market at the time, Clean Sweep doesn't really stand out all that much, but being the only maze game of sorts on the VECTREX gives it one unique point in its favor at least. Regardless, this is a fun little maze game on the VECTREX for those who like that sort of thing.